Let's talk about truth. I call truth the great white whale of philosophy, the very hardest question. Um, I'm here by the banks of my tiny little branch of the Lattimore Creek. As the Amazon is to Brazil, so the Lattimore is to Lattimore Township. All right, now, one problem with theory of truth, as I've said here and there, is that you can't legitimately use a theory to test itself. So the question arises for any given theory of truth whether or not it's true. And of course, it could be true according to itself and still not be a good theory. For example, it might be true that truth is what works, like some version spelled out of the pragmatic theory of truth. It might work to believe that truth is what works. I doubt it, but it might. But that wouldn't show that the pragmatic theory was true. You'd just be arguing in a circle. That's one of many sorts of problems that arise. Actually, some of the other sorts of problems that arise are shown in some of the most famous formulations of theories of truth, such as Aristotle's. To say of what is that it is, or of what is not that it is not, is to speak the truth. To say of what is that it is not, or of what is not that it is to speak falsely. All right, or the Tarski formulation: snow is white. The sentence "snow is white" is true, if and only if snow is white. Then we simply enumerate that for all the sentences of English, and we have a theory of truth, a recursive theory. Those two, they again show this kind of funny circularity or fold of redundancy that arises again and again with attempts to elucidate the theory of truth, and probably, fundamentally arise from the fact that truth is presupposed in any theorizing of any sort, including theorizing about truth itself. So that there you have a special problem. All right. Now, one thing that, so we're talking about the truth chapter, chapter 2 of Entanglements, a system of philosophy. And one thing that the book does is offer a plea for reopening questions about truth. It really is rather remarkable what happened to truth in the 20th century. In a way, philosophers gave up on the question, I think it's fair to say. Tarski-style recursive theories were developed really for formal languages, not for ordinary language. And really, when we're asking what is truth, I think we're partly asking questions about what makes an there language sentence, like, the sky is blue, true. There was a retreat from the question in frustration, because I would say it is such a difficult question, or the suspicion keeps recurring that it's not a genuine question in some way. F.P. Ramsey famously kind of deflated the notion of truth by saying, there's no difference between asserting P and asserting that P is true. So it's just a redundant notion. It's not a notion that we can get rid of it rather than trying to define it. By the same token, however, the classical styles of theory of truth, correspondence, to say of a sentence or of a proposition or perhaps a picture even, that it is true, is to say that it corresponds to reality in some way, maps reality accurately, pictures it, represents it accurately, perhaps, something like that. That's the way Aristotle's formulation sounds, and actually Tarski's too, when you get right down to it, I think. the coherence theory, which characterizes truth in terms of the way a system of belief or a system of assertions hangs together, or the pragmatic theory, according to which truth is what perhaps works in leading us successfully to resolve problematic situations, or leads us profitably, um, or in a fertile way, leads us into the future. Something is true, a proposition, a claim, a sentence is true, a theory is true for as long as it does that to the extent it does. Those classic theories have terrible problems, and I mean, each one has been used to attack the others, and really, they're at such a level of vagueness that it would be very hard to put meat on their bones that would be satisfactory, I think, or testable, perhaps in an analytic philosophy context. I'm not saying that my view about truth does that much better. Really, I start with reinvestigating the ordinary language use of the term truth, or true, truly, and so on. Perhaps there hasn't been a lot of ordinary language style work on truth since Austin and Strawson in the 50s. But one thing I notice is that when we think about truth bearers, or what we're giving a theory of in philosophy, when we give a theory of truth, is we think of propositions, sentences, and so on. But in many or most of the uses of the word true and cognates in the English language, and you should check out the entry in the OED, it's one of the richest in the OED. The word true is often used for things that are nothing like sentences and propositions and so on. For example, true love. Okay? My aim is true, to quote Elvis Costello. There's an activity in carpentry, I think, perhaps called truing. There are many uses of the term which are not applied to what we might call semantic entities or representational entities at all. Now, that's one thing that indicates to me that the notion of truth is actually wider than this kind of linguistically focused philosophical tradition of inquiry into truth would have you suppose. All right, here's my theory of truth in Aristotelian terms. What is true. What is not is false. So I'm arguing that the primary bearer of truth is reality, or the world, or situations, or facts in the world. These are all notions that I try to clarify, at least to some extent, in the chapter. But all right, my idea is that it's the world that is true, and that what we say is true, that may have a kind of representational relation to what is true. Primarily, to focus on what is actually the bearer of truth, or in traditional parlance, the proposition. We should think in terms, this is an application of my ontology of situations, we should think in terms of a language user in a world, and the bearers of truth that we're focusing on here are actual utterances or inscriptions, specific physical events and objects in the world. That's the primary bearer of truth. When we go to abstract entities like propositions, or even sentences, statements, and so on, we get confused. Here's one reason why the utterance is the bearer of truth. If I go, yeah, right, I may be expressing sincere agreement, or I may be expressing complete disagreement. That is, I can utter the same proposition, sentence, and so on once seriously and once sarcastically, and I could express a contradiction. This is one of many ways I argue that the primary bearer of truth is um, a situation rather than a sentence per se, something like that. It's a utterance or inscription in a situation, and it also involves fundamentally a ethical relation of the person uttering uh, the sentence or proposition, uh, or a set of virtues implicated in the utterance or inscription of sincerity, of a attempt to face and speak the truth, or to be a true person, or as the laws of Ethelred put it, to be a true man. Right? Ah, well. Um, so that's some of the work on truth. There's really, it's a pretty long chapter, and I really try to work on this. In some ways, it's a version of an identity theory originally put forward by G.E. Moore and Russell, but then abandoned by them, recently revived by Marion David and others. But it goes much wider than that, actually. And what I would hope for it is that it kind of it could spur a new outbreak of a kind of metaphysical style inquiry into the nature of truth. All right. I mean, Heidegger shows up. All kinds of it. I mess with Tarski and Wittgenstein and so on. All right. So I guess the chapter after this is epistemology, theory of knowledge. I'll get to that one soon.